I have to go and seek out ways to put myself into situations where I'm going to be out of my comfort zone, but I'm going to push myself to learn skills. I'm going to push myself to learn how to control or manage at least my anxiety.
Welcome to Think Deeply, Speak Simply, the podcast that explores the art and science of business communication. Sponsored by Prezent, the AI-powered platform transforming the way professionals share ideas and tell their stories. And now, here's your host, Rajat Mishra, CEO of Prezent and passionate advocate for clear and impactful communications.
Today, we are diving into something that affects every conversation, every interaction. Confidence. I love Marcus Garvey's interpretation of confidence. If you have no confidence in self, you are twice defeated in the race of life. Confidence to me is not a trait you're born with, but it's a skill that can be learned and can be practiced. Today, we'll explore what it takes to communicate with confidence, overcome self-doubt, and embodying confidence in every word and every gesture. Whether you're looking to lead a team, nail a presentation, or just feel more sure of yourself in everyday conversations, this episode has something for you. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Rose Choi Marques. Rose is a communication coach and the founder of Seeds to Roses, a platform dedicated to helping individuals cultivate confidence and find their authentic expression. Rose, thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to the Think Deeply, Speak Simply podcast.
Thank you so much, Rajat, for having me. I am super pumped for today's conversation.
Thank you, Rose. So your journey, Rose, has been super inspiring. You've done a bunch of different things, and now you work with people to help them find their voice and find their confidence. But you didn't start there, right? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you to this point.
Absolutely. So let's take it back to where I'm even from, because I think that has a huge impact on my entire upbringing, right? And so I was born in Spain. I am an immigrant, and both my parents are also immigrants. So my mother is Korean, my dad is Spanish, and I came here when I was a baby. I grew up in Philly, and I went to college on the East Coast in Pittsburgh. But having that cultural differences across 3 different cultures is definitely a big part of my story and a big part of just my entire journey alone. And even just having gone into Silicon Valley right after college, which was, by the way, something that I absolutely did not even foresee myself doing. And my parents certainly did not know what the tech world was all about. And I barely did actually after college. But I ended up moving to Silicon Valley in San Francisco when I finished college. And that's really where my career began. I stayed in tech for about 10 years and moved across different roles that spanned from marketing, sales, communications, and even human resources. And so I gained a lot of different experiences working with different people. And then ultimately earlier this year, I made the decision to start my own business and really be an entrepreneur that helps other individuals as well as supports small businesses and startups. And that's a very brief intro into my background.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Rose. So let's start from the basics, right? So confidence, we at Prezent, we love the phrase sprezzatura, which is an Italian phrase which means studied nonchalance. It's kind of why George Clooney looks so relaxed and confident in the movies, or Julia Roberts, right? It's nonchalant, but it's very studied and prepared. So from your perspective as a coach who helps so many folks, what does confidence mean to you, and why is that important in communication?
I love this big opener question. I would say confidence means, from my vantage point, believing in yourself, ultimately believing in yourself, really believing in who you are, what you're capable of. And then when you pair that with communication, it's believing what you actually are saying. So it's having that confidence in yourself, but it's also believing in what's now you're communicating to another person and getting that person on board with your thoughts or your ideas or your perspectives. And it makes such a difference in your career, and it can make such a difference, for example, in the workplace.
And Rose, I know you've been open about having some anxiety yourself in the early phases of your career. And it's an inspiring journey how you overcome your anxiety and gotten to being confident yourself and then passing that gift on to others. Maybe you can share a little bit about your own journey. How did you overcome that anxiety and get to where you are now?
Yeah, I think first, my anxiety actually probably stems even further beyond the professional world. It definitely stems from upbringings of my childhood, and I think being in that cultural cross intersection of different cultures, it was difficult because one, both of my parents actually spoke. We had all different first languages, so there's three different first languages being held in a household. Imagine that. And so language barriers alone were just something that I grew into as a young kid. But what happens is that sometimes can lead to misunderstandings, right? When you're not all speaking the same first language. And so that's kind of part one is, even this idea of like feeling misunderstood, which a lot of people have when they're communicating, is they're worried about being misunderstood. The other part too is, and this isn't, in transparency with the way that I've grown up, but there were certain points of views that were maybe taken or carried more weight in my household. And my anxiety also stemmed from this fear of not being heard, whether it was from, those closest to me or even strangers, right? And for me, it's important to understand where your anxiety comes from. And I work with people to uncover that, because people's anxiety can come from so many different sources that we actually might not be aware of. And so I did some soul searching on my own of like, why do I feel anxious? And I was able to boil it down to the fear of not being understood and the fear of not being heard. And that, as I got older, and even in high school, I started to notice, wow, other people are also anxious when they're speaking in particular. And especially if you can imagine high schoolers, right? We're all worried about being judged. But I even started to notice all of the moments that my classmates were up in front of the class and their hands were shaking, holding a piece of paper, or they just really appeared nervous. And I reckoned with them because I felt that way too. I would stand in front of the class and I would notice, holy smokes, my heart is racing. Wow, my palms are sweating. I'm having a physical reaction to being in front of other people and having to communicate my message. And lo and behold, there's many people, if not everyone at some point, has maybe felt a semblance of that, whether it's a high pressure situation at work, whether you are at a wedding trying to, giving a toast. There's just so many of these environments where we can start to feel our anxiety set in. And for me, I knew that there had to be a way to decrease that anxiety. I was hell bent on it, right? I was obsessing over it. I was like, how do I make sure that as I continue to talk, whether it's in college and obviously in the professional world, how do I ensure that I'm not getting as nervous as that, right? How do I tackle that? And that's really what propelled me into just getting out of my comfort zone. Really, that was my big, headline of I have to go and seek out ways to put myself into situations where I'm going to be out of my comfort zone, but I'm going to push myself to learn skills. I'm going to push myself to learn how to control or manage at least my anxiety. I'm going to learn techniques that when I get in front of someone, I can articulate my message and get the message that I want across in a confident way. But it took me a lot of practice. And so I did a lot of work. Everything from in high school, I joined something called mock trial. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it's when you get in front of a courtroom and you're competing again. Yes. So a lot of public speaking. In college, I was involved in a business business organization that put me in front of a lot of lecture rooms where I had to give these big presentations. And then even when I graduated college, I joined Toastmasters, an international public speaking organization, where I was talking in front of strangers in the room. And so I put a lot of work into my own communication because I really was convinced that there was a way that we can get better. And it absolutely is true. We all can get better. It does take practice and it does take intention. And I still get nervous, but I don't have that anxiety anymore. I still get nervous though, of course, in certain situations, of course. And I think nerves are actually really good, but having the anxiety not necessarily be a barrier to my success has been a big lighting moment for me.
Yeah. I love that story, Rose, how you introspected and kind of really went deep and what is the cause of the anxiety and then put yourself out there. I can relate to that personally. I used to stutter and stammer when I was a child. Till about 11 or 12, I had a pretty bad stutter and stammer. So you can imagine my friends in India mercilessly would make fun of me. And I went through my own journey to overcome my stuttering and stammering. So let me ask you this, Rose, you kind of mentioned the nervous person in a wedding making a toast or someone making a high stakes presentation. So, your palms are sweaty and, I don't want to go into the rest of Eminem's song, but,
love that song.
Yeah. But for folks who are in that situation and anxious, what would be a tip that you would give them?
First tip I always give is to breathe. It is the core of any speaking. And the beautiful thing about your breath is it does so many beautiful things for you. Mm-hmm. First off, it can settle you. So quite literally, if you take a breath in the moment that you're feeling really anxious, even if you think that it's going to be too long, it's not. And it's normal to breathe. We're all breathing. But when you take that breath, it gives you a moment to just actually physically settle, right? Like your heart rate will actually drop, whether it's 1 BPM or 2 BPMs, it's going to go down just a little bit. It also gives you the ability to slow down for a second. And here's what happens when we're anxious. When we're anxious, we have a tendency to speed up. That's why when you see people who are speaking very quickly, or you're seeing people who you can't maybe understand what they're saying because all of the things are coming out at once, a lot of times that's coming from being overly nervous or overly anxious. But when you take a breath, you're actually giving yourself some space to just slow down and recalibrate. What exactly are you saying? So you're giving yourself that space. The other reason why I really like taking a breath anytime that you're feeling nervous, and you can take multiple breaths, of course, multiple bigger breaths, is it also helps you enunciate, which is really important in communication because sometimes, especially adults, we don't really focus on our enunciation. We just throw words together very quickly, and we don't actually notice that we do that. But when you enunciate, you can sharpen your message. But you can't enunciate if you're going really quickly. And so it goes back to the breath. That's why the breath for me is such a big staple when I'm talking about speaking, whether it's in front of a smaller group, a friend, or in front of a larger audience. And then the other thing I will say, just because sometimes we're talking, in this case, I am imagining a larger audience in this example. Yeah. And so one technique I really like too, outside of breathing, is I like to find my 1 or 2 anchors in the crowd. And what I mean by anchors, and this is more of a tactical tip, but it really has helped me. Have you ever, Rajat, felt like you were listening to someone else's presentation or someone was giving a keynote or a speech and you felt like that person was like looking at you or speaking directly to you?
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, have you felt that?
Yeah. And it feels amazing that you're being, right. There's a focus on you and he or she's speaking to you. Yeah.
Yes. And the reason why is because you in that moment were that person's anchor, meaning you're actually giving them some really positive energy, which by the way, like outside of finding your anchor, being someone's anchor is also something really nice too. So it sounds like you've been someone's anchor. But when you're on the speaking side of things, try to find those people. They're usually the people that are giving you a big smile on their face. They're usually the people that are nodding when you say something and giving you some positive reinforcement. And I like to find those people and just come back to them. Because every time I look at their face, every time I feel their energy, every time I get that sense of reinforcement, it gives me that little boost of encouragement I need to scan the crowd and continue with my message. So find a couple anchors in your crowd, and that has usually helped a lot of people decrease their anxiety.
Wow. I think both those tips, Rose, will really help our audience members. Let me take a breath as well. And I love the idea that you're not talking to a faceless mass of people. You can pick a few anchors and speak to them. So amazing. Thank you for that. So let's go back to confidence, right? So in your work, what do you think are the fundamental building blocks of confidence, and how do you kind of break it down when you work with folks?
Yes, I actually do break this down very, very structured because in my head, that's the only way it makes sense is really through building blocks. Thinking of them through categories, because the whole world of communication, there's a lot to cover. And sometimes people come to me and they're like, I have problems with my message. Like actually just whatever I'm saying, it doesn't, sometimes it's not coming out the way I want. Other people will come to me and they'll say, when I get in front of the room, I am so nervous that I just shut down and my body language is all. So let me break it down to you in this way. I'm going to actually kind of play off this building block analogy, if you will. So I want you to imagine a three-dimensional pyramid, right? A three-dimensional pyramid, which has four sides, right? Mm-hmm. Four sides. And then it has its base. Okay. So let's just talk about the base. The way that I envision communication and the building blocks of it. The base is your actual message, right? So it's the what you're saying. It's what you've written down. It's the key core idea that you're articulating. It's also how those ideas come together. So it's, how clear is your message? Can people follow your train of thought? And it's also even the supporting evidence that you might have thrown in there. It's really the what you're saying.
The what.
And that's the base. That's the what, the base. Then you've got your sides, right? Those sides for me represent your delivery, which is a whole aspect of communication. And it's the how you are saying your message. It's not the what, it's the how you are delivering your message. Those are the things like body language, vocal variety, all of those different tips and techniques that people use, orators, public speakers, they're using very specific delivery techniques. And so those are the sides, right? Because the reason why I actually give them so much perimeter is because 70% of our communication is nonverbal. So it needs to cover a lot. Delivery is very important, as is your base. And then I want to address one last piece of this pyramid, because it is three-dimensional. So there's a whole inside, right? What about the inside, the inside matter of this pyramid? There's substance there. Now, that substance, the way that I think about it, is belief and connection to what you're saying. So it's not just what you're saying. It's actually how passionate are you about this topic? How much do you believe in what you're saying? It's going back to the confident communication. How connected are you? And if you notice someone who's really passionate, knows their stuff, and is delivering it in a way that is knocking your socks off, they're checking all of the building block boxes. So that's how I think about it. Base in terms of the content of your message, the what.
Yeah.
The sides, the delivery, which is the how, and then the inside, let's not forget the core of who we are, which is what do you actually believe in and how connected are you to what you're saying?
Yeah, I love that metaphor. And as you were delivering it, I was thinking about, the base, the what are the message, how you're delivering, and of course you're very passionate about this topic. Just let's take a minute to talk about the sides, Rose, the delivery, because I think most people in the business setting, I think they spend a lot of time on what the message is, and they believe in the message. They believe in that's why they are at work driving that change. Any tips you have or around delivery that people can learn from, especially in a business setting when they're presenting to senior executives or some of their peers?
Yes. So one, I'm going to bring back the one other point that we made earlier, which was breathe, because that is directly correlated to a delivery technique. That's what I mean by your breath is truly the place where you start. So I'm going to reiterate that part, which is breathe. And again, because of the fact that breathe, what that does for you outside of just calm you down is it allows you to slow down. And by the way, that's a delivery technique that can roll up. Slowing down and having a really strong pace when you speak rolls into the umbrella of a whole world of vocal variety, which we could probably spend an hour just on vocal variety alone. But pace is a really important aspect of that. So again, going back to the breath, right? These things are all linked. Everything is very connected here. When you breathe and you take a breath, that gives you the ability to control your pace. It allows you to move, ebb and flow in a way that doesn't sound robotic, that doesn't sound like monotone. And so breathe, because that's going to just do you so many wonders. That's my biggest piece of advice. But the one other tip that I do think is important is body language. And again, body language is another bucket. So I want to be very specific with, I guess, this technique, which is when people think about body language, we could talk about facial expressions, we could talk about hand gestures. Those are all very important. And I do emphasize those. But actually, if we just think about body language for a moment, I want to think about it in terms of being open and having open, active body language. What do I mean by that? Similarly, when we're anxious and we start talking really fast and we get, people are thinking that we're really nervous. The same thing actually happens with body language, except that we shrink. So when we get nervous, people tend to shrink.
Small. Yeah.
We get smaller. So we'll either hunch over, maybe we'll put our hands in our laps. You've seen it before. You've seen that person who's definitely nervous and they start to shrink. It's just a natural reaction. So if you're wanting to portray confidence and actually feel confident when you're speaking and deliver it to your audience, you need to be mindful of your body language. And it's also going to help you, even just by standing straight. Right now I'm standing, right, speaking to you, and it's helping me feel better than just sitting. And even just your posture. I mean, just thinking about myself being like smaller or being open, it's giving me a boost of confidence and it's giving the audience the ability to see me as confident. So just thinking about being active and being open instead of being closed and being still.
Yeah. I know I've done that, make myself small. I've seen other folks do it. Why do we do that, Rose? Why, when we are anxious and not confident, why do we sometimes get into this kind of try to make ourselves small or almost like invisible?
Have you ever seen that GIF where I think it's one of the Simpsons going back and being pulled into a bush? They're kind of just disappearing into a bush. And I don't know why that just came to my mind, because exactly what you're saying, when we're shrinking, it's like, maybe people won't see me. Maybe if I get smaller, people won't notice I'm here.
Yeah.
And that's where anxiety is coming from, is we don't want to be seen. Maybe we don't want to be judged. And so if we could just sit in the back of the room instead of at the table, or if we could maybe put our hands in our laps instead of putting our hand on the table, maybe people won't notice me as much. That's what's, I think, driving a lot of this. A lot of what's happening inside.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And the speaking fast, maybe we want to get done with it quickly. So we're trying to be invisible and speak as quickly so we can get out of there. And like you're saying, take a breath, be present, and connect with your audience, right? Any other tips, Rose, for communicating with confidence? You mentioned breathing and body language. Anything else?
So many tips. I would say from a delivery perspective, this is going back to vocal variety, just because I do think vocal variety tends to be one of the more complex areas, but it's also really important. Vocal variety is everything from your pace, which I talked about, but it also can be your inflection, and it also can be your volume. And so you've probably remember maybe teachers or professors from college who had that monotone voice. And that's because they're not really ebbing and flowing with their actual vocal cords, right? So this is very specifically with your voice. And what that does is it doesn't allow the audience to stay engaged with what you're saying because it just sounds very flat. So it's important to practice being able to higher your volume, being lower your volume, right? And even understanding strategically of where to place those. One way to do that is if you're emphasizing something, then maybe you could get louder.
Yeah.
Or if you want to get the audience's attention for just 1 second, you can actually get really quiet. Then everyone's drawing in. So using those, not every second of every time you're speaking, but inserting some of those elements into your delivery can really help get the crowd leaning in to what you're saying even more.
Love that. I think those great tips. So when you think of confidence, Rose, and what you're doing with Seeds to Roses, confidence is something that not just helps yourself, but you can also use that to help others, right? So maybe you can tell me a little bit about the work you're doing in Seeds to Roses and how it's helping other people build confidence.
Yes. So Seeds to Roses is a two-part business. The first I'll spend more time focusing on because it's the communication aspect. And then second, I also do work with startups and small businesses on the marketing side. But I love my communication side of the business because I work directly with individuals from all ages, all different types of fields, disciplines, whether they're in the medical field. A lot of them do tend to be more in a workplace type of setting. But these individuals are coming to me and they're telling me real stories, experiences, and feelings that they're having in the workplace. Hey, I'm worried about being judged when I speak in front of my boss. Hey, I'm worried about my message not coming across when I'm speaking in front of potential customers. There's so many use cases that I'm seeing communication, and a lot of people are coming because they're having these self-doubt, and also they're running into walls, right? For whatever reason, and I help uncover them. I help them uncover what exactly are those challenges that you're experiencing and why. And so what I do is I work one-on-one with individuals through coaching. And what I specifically do as a coach is I focus on their growth areas. It's just a term that I've coined. Growth areas are essentially what does the specific individual need support with? How are we developing, refining their communication skills? Because everyone is different. And so I don't do a one-size-fits-all type of crash course on public speaking or communication because people will come to me and have really strong enunciation. And then the next person I'm partnering and working with, they need to master body language. So it really depends on what they're doing. And so I cover both the emotional, mental side of speaking as well as the tactical side. And so we practice our speaking, our communication. And in many cases, I also need to see what that looks like in the real world. So they'll actually even, in many times, show me or send me what they're doing out in their workplace. So lots of practice and also a lot of inner reflections.
Okay, that's great. That's great, Rose. And one of the things our listeners tell us, we're big believers in daily rituals and getting a little bit better every day. So, if you had to speak to some of the folks in corporate America who want to get better at business communication and better at business storytelling, what are some daily tips? What are some things? The breathing is a great tip. What else could they be doing every day and make small improvements on the journey to become better business storytellers?
Yeah. So number one, it goes back to I'm going to address the deeper side of things because it really does stem from there, right? We talked about believing in yourself. We talked about reflecting on why you might be having anxiety. So the first thing I like to tell people is write down 2 to 3 highlights, accomplishments, things you're proud of. Just write them down. And I want you to literally put them somewhere that you can see them every day. Just in case you forget how badass you are, you have that to go back to. Yes, I'm sorry if I'm not allowed to say any cuss words, but just because people need reminders.
Yes.
People need reminders. I did this, I did that. And we forget all of these incredible things that we've done, all of these moments that we're proud of. And sometimes we need a daily reminder to remember, wow, we did that. And if I can do that, I can go into this presentation and I can nail it. So just having that alone, I think, and I have my own sticky, like it's there.
Yeah.
So that alone, I think, is number one. And then number two is take up space. Take up space physically. I mean, physically take up space. This is going back to the body language. When you're slouching, you notice you're slouching, posture up. Okay. You notice your hands are in your lap when you're in meeting, put them on the table. Put them on the table. Okay. If you're called on for a question, let's say you're at work or you're at an event and someone calls on you for a question, don't sit down, stand up. Stand up and answer the question. Practice taking up space, because the more you take up space, it goes back to that body language. The more you're going to feel confident. The more you're going to also get even used to taking up space, as opposed to that shrinking piece. So those are a couple ones that you have to. Oh, and the last one, sorry, I just thought is what I just did right there. Actually, when you have the urge to say something, we've all been there, right? We've all been in that moment. We have an urge to say something, but for some reason, we just don't say it. Even though we're like, I know this is a good idea, or I think this would add value. You have that urge that you really think would add value, but we're scared for some reason of who's in the room or being judged. Just say it. Just say it. Get used to using your voice. Get used to putting yourself outside of your comfort zone. And when you have a strong urge, and again, you think it's going to deliver real value to whomever you're speaking with, then practice saying it.
Great suggestions, Rose. Because I think I like your part about writing it down, because all of us, I mean, me included, we tend to gravitate towards things we didn't do well, or our deficiencies or drawbacks. So just getting that reminder, like you said, I am a badass communicator, and this is what I've done in the past, gives you that confidence. And take up space, like you said, not just physically, but also with your voice. Learn to use your voice. Amazing suggestions. Rose, this brings us to a fun part of our podcast, which is our rapid fire. So you haven't heard these questions. I'm going to ask you quick questions, right? No prep required here. And just tell me the first thing, the first sentence that comes to mind. Yeah? Ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right. Number one, what's one word you'd use to describe the art of communication?
Connection.
Okay. Connection. How is AI changing the way we communicate?
It's making writing communication a bit easier so that we can focus more on our in-person communication.
Okay, that's great. So taking some of the writing parts out so we can focus on, like you said, connection. What's a common communication myth you wish people would unlearn?
That it's something people are born with, that people are just born fantastic communicators, or because that person is social or I don't know, type A, that's more natural to them. Maybe it might come more naturally, but no, growth mindset, you can absolutely become a great communicator, no matter who you are and what your past is.
Awesome. If you can give one piece of advice to someone preparing for a big presentation, what would that be?
Practice. Please practice. Don't wing it. Practice. Put time, thought, energy into it, and go in there and remember how badass you are.
Okay, final question. What's something you wish, Rose, you knew about communication when you started your career, for all the early in career folks listening to this?
I wish I knew. This is interesting. I wish I knew that there are so many different ways to give a speech. There's a memorized way. There's a way where you read a speech, and then there's the extemporaneous side. I discovered extemporaneous speaking when I was in college, but I wish I had discovered it earlier, because until then I was either reading or memorizing what I was saying, which actually fueled my anxiety. So I would say that there's a lot of different ways to deliver your message.
Okay, awesome. That's great, Rose. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and great tips. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with, Rose, and also for our listeners that want to connect with you and your firm? What's the best place to find you?
Yes, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always there. So that's a great platform to use if you want to reach out and connect with me. And I think just going back to the two pieces I just want to iterate is, remember those moments where you've already gotten out of your comfort zone and use those as serving pieces for you next time you're in an uncomfortable situation. And remember to breathe. Please remember to breathe whenever you're communicating, whether in front of a small or a large audience.
So let me take a deep breath, Rose. That felt great. Thank you, Rose, for joining us. It was an amazing conversation. Next week, we'll meet even more incredible guests and continue to explore the question, what makes great storytelling great? Until then, let's think deeply and speak simply.
Thanks for tuning in to Think Deeply, Speak Simply. This episode was brought to you by Prezent, your secret weapon for brilliant presentations. Visit Prezent.ai to transform how you communicate. Until next time, keep thinking deeply and speaking simply.